Chapter 1. The Message That Ended My Marriage. My husband ended our marriage with a text message, emptied our joint account, and flew off with a woman half my age, convinced I would panic and beg him to come back. But what he didn't know was that months before that message, I had already protected my money, documented his mistakes, and prepared to let his own ego destroy him. And I'm Claire. This is my story of how silence, family, and the law became my revenge. I was rearranging a display of linen blouses when my phone vibrated against the counter. It was a slow Tuesday afternoon in my shop, the kind where the sunlight slants through the front window and dust hangs in the air like it has nowhere better to be. The bell above the door had not rung in nearly 20 minutes. I remember thinking that I might close early, take a walk, give my feet a break. Everything felt ordinary, predictable, safe. My name is Claire Whitman. I was 49 years old that afternoon, standing inside a boutique I had built with my own hands over the better part of 15 years. Soft music played low from a speaker near the register. A woman browsed quietly near the scarves, her fingers brushing silk like she was afraid to disturb it. I smiled at her, the automatic kind of smile you give when you have done something 1,000 times and it still matters to you. Then I glanced at my phone. It was a text message from my husband, Andrew Whitman. No greeting, no hesitation, just words. He said he was done. He said he had been unhappy for a long time and was finally choosing himself. He said he was leaving town that night with someone else, younger. He added that he had already taken the money from our joint account, so there would be no confusion later. At the end of the message was a line that made my throat tighten, something about how I would be fine, that I always was, followed by a casual smiley face that felt like a slap. I read it once, then again. My hands did not shake. That was the strangest part. I expected something dramatic, a rush of heat or dizziness or tears pressing up from somewhere deep. Instead, there was a stillness, sharp and clear, like the moment after you finally understand a noise that has been bothering you all night. The woman near the scarves cleared her throat softly. I looked up, smiled again, and walked over to help her choose between 2 shades of blue. I rang up her purchase, wrapped it carefully, thanked her for coming in. She told me she loved the shop, said she would be back soon. I told her to have a lovely afternoon, and meant it. Only after the door closed behind her did I look at my phone again. Andrew was 52. We had been married for 17 years. He worked as a regional operations manager for a logistics company outside the city, a job he liked mostly because it sounded important when he explained it to people at dinner parties. Over the last year, he had grown restless. New clothes, a new haircut that did not quite suit him, long hours that did not line up with his pay stubs. I had noticed. I had asked questions. He had laughed them off, told me I worried too much, said I was reading into things because I spent too much time alone. I stared at the text message and felt something click into place. I did not respond. Instead, I opened my banking app. The joint account was the first one that loaded, the familiar balance replaced by a flat, merciless 0. No pending transactions, no confusion, just empty. That was the moment the stakes became real. Money changes the shape of betrayal. Love can break quietly. Trust can erode over time. But money leaves a mark you can see. It tells you exactly how much someone thinks you're worth. I leaned back against the counter and let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. The shop smelled faintly of cotton and lavender, the same way it always had. Outside, a bus rumbled past. Life continued at its usual pace, completely indifferent to the fact that my marriage had just been reduced to a few lines of text. My phone vibrated again. Another message from Andrew, this one longer, defensive. He said there was no point talking. He said lawyers would only make things messy. He said he hoped we could be adults about it. He mentioned that he would come by later for his things, as if we were discussing a forgotten jacket. I set the phone face down. People like to imagine moments like this as explosions, shouting matches, tears on the kitchen floor. That is how it looks in movies. In real life, it's quieter, colder, more procedural. You begin to take inventory. What is mine? What is shared? What can be taken from me if I do nothing? I locked the front door of the shop a little earlier than usual and flipped the sign to closed. The late afternoon light had shifted, stretching long shadows across the floor. I walked through the space slowly, touching the racks, the counter, the framed photo near the back wall of the shop when it first opened. This place was more than a business. It was proof that I could build something stable, something that did not vanish overnight. At home that evening, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and my phone beside it. I read Andrew's messages again, not as a wife, but as a witness. The wording, the timing, the casual way he admitted to taking the money. Each sentence felt less like an ending and more like evidence. I did not respond. Instead, I opened my banking app. The joint account was the first one that loaded, the familiar balance replaced by a flat, merciless zero. No pending transactions, no confusion, just empty. That was the moment the stakes became real. Money changes the shape of betrayal. Love can break quietly. Trust can erode over time. But money leaves a mark you can see. It tells you exactly how much someone thinks you're worth. I leaned back against the counter and let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. The shop smelled faintly of cotton and lavender, the same way it always had. Outside, a bus rumbled past. Life continued at its usual pace, completely indifferent to the fact that my marriage had just been reduced to a few lines of text. My phone vibrated again. Another message from Andrew. This one longer, defensive. He said there was no point talking. He said lawyers would only make things messy. He said he hoped we could be adults about it. He mentioned that he would come by later for his things, as if we were discussing a forgotten jacket. I set the phone face down. People like to imagine moments like this as explosions, shouting matches, tears on the kitchen floor. That is how it looks in movies. In real life, it's quieter, colder, more procedural. You begin to take inventory. What is mine? What is shared? What can be taken from me if I do nothing? I locked the front door of the shop a little earlier than usual and flipped the sign to closed. The late afternoon light had shifted, stretching long shadows across the floor. I walked through the space slowly, touching the racks, the counter, the framed photo near the back wall of the shop when it first opened. This place was more than a business. It was proof that I could build something stable, something that did not vanish overnight. At home that evening, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and my phone beside it. I read Andrew's messages again, not as a wife, but as a witness. The wording, the timing, the casual way he admitted to taking the money. Each sentence felt less like an ending and more like evidence. I did not respond. Instead, I opened my banking app. The joint account was the first one that loaded, the familiar balance replaced by a flat, merciless zero. No pending transactions, no confusion, just empty. That was the moment the stakes became real. Money changes the shape of betrayal. Love can break quietly. Trust can erode over time. But money leaves a mark you can see. It tells you exactly how much someone thinks you're worth. I leaned back against the counter and let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. The shop smelled faintly of cotton and lavender, the same way it always had. Outside, a bus rumbled past. Life continued at its usual pace, completely indifferent to the fact that my marriage had just been reduced to a few lines of text. My phone vibrated again. Another message from Andrew. This one longer, defensive. He said there was no point talking. He said lawyers would only make things messy. He said he hoped we could be adults about it. He mentioned that he would come by later for his things, as if we were discussing a forgotten jacket. I set the phone face down. People like to imagine moments like this as explosions, shouting matches, tears on the kitchen floor. That is how it looks in movies. In real life, it's quieter, colder, more procedural. You begin to take inventory. What is mine? What is shared? What can be taken from me if I do nothing? I locked the front door of the shop a little earlier than usual and flipped the sign to closed. The late afternoon light had shifted, stretching long shadows across the floor. I walked through the space slowly, touching the racks, the counter, the framed photo near the back wall of the shop when it first opened. This place was more than a business. It was proof. Proof that I could build something stable, something that did not vanish overnight. At home that evening, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and my phone beside it. I read Andrew's messages again, not as a wife, but as a witness. The wording, the timing, the casual way he admitted to taking the money. Each sentence felt less like an ending and more like evidence. I did not respond. Instead, I opened my banking app. The joint account was the first one that loaded, the familiar balance replaced by a flat, merciless zero. No pending transactions, no confusion, just empty. That was the moment the stakes became real. Money changes the shape of betrayal. Love can break quietly. Trust can erode over time. But money leaves a mark you can see. It tells you exactly how much someone thinks you are worth. I leaned back against the counter and let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. The shop smelled faintly of cotton and lavender, the same way it always had. Outside, a bus rumbled past. Life continued at its usual pace, completely indifferent to the fact that my marriage had just been reduced to a few lines of text. My phone vibrated again. Another message from Andrew, this one longer, defensive. He said there was no point talking. He said lawyers would only make things messy. He said he hoped we could be adults about it. He mentioned that he would come by later for his things, as if we were discussing a forgotten jacket. I set the phone face down. People like to imagine moments like this as explosions, shouting matches, tears on the kitchen floor. That is how it looks in movies. In real life, it is quieter, colder, more procedural. You begin to take inventory. What is mine? What is shared? What can be taken from me if I do nothing? I locked the front door of the shop a little earlier than usual and flipped the sign to closed. The late afternoon light had shifted, stretching long shadows across the floor. I walked through the space slowly, touching the racks, the counter, the framed photo near the back wall of the shop when it first opened. This place was more than a business. It was proof. Proof that I could build something stable, something that did not vanish overnight. At home that evening, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and my phone beside it. I read Andrew's messages again, not as a wife, but as a witness. The wording, the timing, the casual way he admitted to taking the money. Each sentence felt less like an ending and more like evidence. I did not feel surprised. That realization hurt more than anything else. For months, I had sensed the shift, the distance that was not quite distance, the defensiveness that arrived before any accusation. There had been moments when I lay awake at night staring at the ceiling, wondering whether I was imagining it all, whether this was just what happened when two people grew older together and ran out of things to say. Part of me had wanted to be wrong badly enough that I almost convinced myself I was. But some instincts do not disappear just because you ignore them. I poured myself a glass of water and took a slow sip. My reflection in the darkened window looked calm, tired maybe, but steady. I did not look like someone who had just been abandoned. I looked like someone who had just received confirmation. I picked up my phone one more time and scrolled back to the first message. The smiley face at the end still made my stomach turn. It was meant to soften the blow, to suggest kindness where there was none. It told me more about Andrew than he realized. This had not started today, and it would not end today either. I turned the phone off and placed it in a drawer. There would be time to respond later if I chose to at all. For now, there was something else I needed to do, something I had already begun long before this afternoon, even if I had not fully admitted it to myself yet. I stood up from the table and walked into the bedroom, the quiet of the house settling around me. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one. Somewhere across town, Andrew was packing a suitcase, convinced he had taken everything that mattered. He was wrong, and as I turned off the light and let the room fall into darkness, I understood with a clarity that surprised me that this moment was not the end of my story. It was simply the point where pretending became unnecessary. Chapter 2. The silence was not weakness. That night, after the house went quiet and the phone stayed dark in the drawer where I had left it, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and let myself admit something I had been avoiding for months. I had known. Not in the clear, undeniable way that comes with proof, but in the slow, accumulating way that settles into your body before your mind catches up. It had started the previous fall. Andrew began leaving earlier for work and coming home later, always with an explanation that sounded reasonable on its own. A meeting that ran long, a client dinner that popped up last minute, a traffic problem on the interstate. I told myself that this was normal, that middle age came with restlessness, that everyone went through phases. Still, something felt off, like a door in the house that no longer closed all the way. He stopped asking about my day. When I talked about the shop, he nodded without listening. At night, he turned away from me in bed, already scrolling through his phone. Once, when I reached for it jokingly, he pulled it back too quickly and laughed in a way that felt rehearsed. "You are imagining things," he said. "You spend too much time alone." That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. I hated myself for doubting him. We had built a life together, 17 years of shared routines, shared holidays, shared disappointments. Doubt felt like betrayal in reverse, so I swallowed it. I smiled. I made dinner. I told myself I was lucky. But instincts do not vanish just because you refuse to listen. In December, a charge appeared on our credit card that did not fit. A restaurant across town on a night Andrew said he was working late. When I asked him about it, he shrugged and said he must have met a colleague. I wanted to believe him badly enough that I let it go, even as something in my chest tightened. A week later, I sat alone in my office at the shop long after closing time, the lights low, the streets outside empty. I remember staring at the numbers on my computer screen, the neat separation between my business accounts and our personal ones. The boutique had been mine long before Andrew. I opened it in my early 30s, back when he was still figuring out what he wanted to do with his career. We had talked about combining everything once we married. I had smiled and changed the subject. That night, I opened a new checking account at a different bank. I did not tell anyone. Not Andrew, not my friends, not even myself, not fully. I told myself it was just good sense, that every woman should have something of her own, that independence did not mean disloyalty. It meant survival. Over the next few months, I began paying closer attention, not in an obsessive way, but with quiet focus. I noticed how Andrew guarded his phone, how his temper flared when I asked simple questions. I noticed how he dressed better for work but seemed indifferent at home. I noticed how often he talked about feeling stuck, about wanting something new, something exciting. One evening in January, I finally said something. We were sitting at the kitchen table, plates half finished, the television murmuring in the background. I told him I felt like he was pulling away from me. He laughed softly and said I was being dramatic. He said he loved me. He said I worried too much. His voice was calm, reasonable, convincing. I apologized for bringing it up. Later that night, I cried in the bathroom with the water running so he would not hear me. That was when I decided to speak to a lawyer. Her name was Natalie Price. She specialized in family law and came recommended by a friend who had gone through a messy divorce years earlier. I made the appointment under the pretense of updating my will. Sitting across from her in a small office with framed certificates on the wall, I felt ridiculous at first, like I was betraying a man who had done nothing wrong. She listened without interrupting as I described my concerns. When I finished, she folded her hands on the desk and said calmly that asking questions did not make me paranoid, it made me prepared. She explained the difference between marital assets and separate property, the importance of documentation, the risks of commingling funds. She did not tell me what to do, she told me what could happen. I left her office feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Around that same period, I asked my accountant, Mei Lin, for advice. We had worked together for years, and she knew my business inside and out. Over coffee in her quiet office, I told her I wanted to simplify my personal finances. She raised an eyebrow but did not push. She helped me move a portion of my savings into the new account I had opened, spreading the transfers over several months so nothing looked sudden or alarming. This was not a plan for revenge. It was a safety net I hoped I would never need. By early spring, I had everything in place. My business remained untouched, firmly separate, its records clean and clear. My personal savings sat quietly where only I could access them. The joint account continued as usual, enough to cover shared expenses, enough to keep things looking normal. Andrew never noticed. Or if he did, he didn't care. When I think back now, that's what stands out the most. Not the betrayal, but the certainty with which he assumed I was unaware, that I would be caught off guard, that I would panic. The night before he sent the text message that ended our marriage, he kissed my cheek absently and told me he would be late. I watched him leave and felt a strange calm settle over me. I went to bed early, my phone face down on the nightstand. The next day, standing in my shop with sunlight on my hands and fabric beneath my fingers, everything finally aligned. The text message was not a shock, it was a confirmation. By the time I turned my phone off that evening, I understood something important. Silence had never been weakness, it had been observation, preparation, the quiet gathering of strength while someone else underestimated me. I had not acted yet, I had not confronted Andrew or made any calls, but I was ready, and readiness, I was learning, was its own kind of power. I closed my eyes and let the stillness settle in, knowing that the next steps would change everything. Chapter 3. When Ego Makes Men Confess. I did not sleep much after that. When morning came, it felt less like waking up and more like stepping into a role I had been quietly rehearsing. I showered, dressed, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table while the house stayed silent around me. The phone remained off. I wanted the first move to be mine. At 9 sharp, I called the bank. The woman on the line sounded cheerful, well-trained, calm. She asked how she could help me. I told her I needed to place an immediate restriction on our joint credit accounts and remove my husband as an authorized user. My voice surprised me. Steady, clear, like I was reading a grocery list. She asked for the reason. I said misuse for extramarital expenses. There was a pause, brief and professional. She explained the process. Verification questions, account numbers, confirmation statements. I answered each one without hesitation. When she told me the change was effective immediately, I thanked her and hung up. It was done. I sat there for a moment, my hands wrapped around my mug, feeling something close to relief. Not joy, not triumph, control. The kind that settles into your shoulders when you realize the ground beneath you is solid again. My phone buzzed almost right away. Andrew. I turned it on and watched the messages come in, one after another, like a tide he could not stop. At first, he was mocking. You really going to play games now? You always have to be dramatic. Then defensive. I did not take more than my share. You spend plenty on that little shop of yours. I did not respond. The tone shifted quickly. What did you do to the card? I'm trying to check into the hotel. Call me. His words grew longer, less confident, filled with explanations I had not asked for. He told me about the flight he booked, the place he chose, the money he thought he would have access to. Every detail was another thread he handed me without realizing it. I watched the screen light up and go dark again, resisting the urge to interrupt him. Silence has a way of making people reveal themselves. Late that morning, a new name appeared in his messages. Lila. He did not introduce her directly. He didn't have to. He mentioned her casually, as if she were already part of the landscape. Lila does not deserve to be dragged into this. She has nothing to do with our issues. I pictured her through his words before I ever saw her face. Young, confident, certain that she was the exception, not the pattern. Around noon, curiosity got the better of me. I searched her name online. It did not take long. Her social media was public, full of bright smiles and carefully filtered moments. a photo of a hotel room with a city view, a caption about new beginnings, another post about choosing happiness and cutting out negativity. I closed the app and set the phone down. By early afternoon, the calls began. Andrew first, then a number I recognized but had not saved. His mother. I let it ring twice before answering. "Ellie, what is going on?" Marianne said, her voice tight with concern and something sharper underneath. "Andrew says you are cutting him off, that you are being unreasonable." I took a breath before speaking. "He told you that?" "He is very upset," she said. "He says you've been distant for years, that you pushed him away." I leaned back in my chair and stared at the wall. "I am happy to read you his messages, all of them." There was a silence on the line. "You would not need to," she replied finally. "I trust my son." "I understand," I said. "If you change your mind, let me know." I ended the call before she could respond. Minutes later, another message from Andrew appeared, more frantic now. "My mother called me. What are you telling people?" I did not answer. The next step was the airline. I called the customer service line and waited on hold, listening to the same looping music until a representative picked up. I gave her the booking information Andrew had so helpfully included in his texts. I explained that the charges were unauthorized and disputed them. She asked a few questions, typed her moment, then confirmed the cancellation. The hotel was even easier. By late afternoon, Andrew's messages had devolved into fragments. "Where am I supposed to stay? This is insane. You're ruining everything." I imagined him standing in a lobby somewhere, phone in hand, realizing that the version of events he had planned so carefully was unraveling. I felt no satisfaction in it, only distance. That evening, another call came through. "Ellie," Marianne said again, her tone different this time, less accusatory, more uncertain. "Andrew says there are messages, things you misunderstood." "I am happy to see them to you," I said gently. "I am not hiding anything." She did not argue. She did not apologize either. She said she would call back later. When I hung up, I noticed my hands were still steady. Andrew sent one last message that night, longer than the rest. "I never meant to hurt you. I just needed something different. You are making this worse than it has to be." I read it slowly, not as his wife, but as someone preparing for what came next. The admissions were all there, the timing, the intent, the assumption that he could decide how this ended. I placed the phone face down on the table and turned off the light in the kitchen. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Somewhere across town, Andrew was scrambling, trying to regain control of a story that was no longer his to tell. I went to bed early, the weight of the day settling into my bones. Tomorrow, I would make another call, one that would shift this from chaos into structure. For now, I let the silence return, knowing that his ego had done more damage to him than anything I had said. Chapter 4. The courtroom is where fantasies die. The call I made the next morning felt different from the others, less urgent, more deliberate. Natalie Price answered on the second ring, her voice steady in the way that had already begun to calm me. "I have everything you sent," she said after I told her what had happened. "The messages, the bank confirmations, the disputed charges. This is enough to move quickly." I asked her how quickly. 3 to 5 business days for an emergency hearing," she replied. "Temporary protections, nothing permanent yet, but it will stop the bleeding." That was all I needed to hear. The days leading up to the hearing passed in a strange blur. Andrew continued texting, though the tone shifted again. Where there had been arrogance, there was now bargaining. He asked me to reconsider. He asked me to talk. He suggested mediation without lawyers, as if the damage had not already been done. I did not respond. Every message went straight to Natalie, neatly organized and time-stamped. On the 4th day, I stood outside the county courthouse just before 9 in the morning, my coat buttoned up against the cold wind that cut through the plaza. The building itself was unremarkable. Pale stone, narrow windows, a place designed to feel impartial. I paused at the entrance. took a breath, and walked inside. Natalie met me near the security checkpoint. She wore a dark suit and carried a slim folder under her arm. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded. Inside the courtroom, everything felt smaller than I expected. The benches were worn smooth, the ceiling low. A few other people waited quietly, their own lives suspended in similar moments. When Andrew walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked confident at first, relaxed even. He wore a tailored jacket and carried himself the way he always had when he thought charm would be enough. When he saw me, his smile flickered. He took a seat across the aisle, glanced at Natalie, then back at me. "You really went through with this," he said under his breath as I passed. I did not answer. The judge entered, and the room shifted into attention. Natalie stood when our case was called. Andrew rose too, alone, no attorney beside him. "Miss Price," the judge said, "you may proceed." Natalie spoke clearly, without embellishment. She outlined the timeline, the joint account withdrawal, the credit card misuse. She referenced the texts Andrew had sent, his own words admitting to taking the money and booking travel with a third party. As she spoke, she handed copies to the clerk. The judge looked down, reading. Andrew shifted in his seat. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said, when given the chance to respond. "We are adults. I told her what I was doing. I took what was fair." The judge raised an eyebrow. "You informed her after you withdrew the funds. Is that correct?" Andrew hesitated. "I did not think it mattered. We were separating anyway." Natalie stood again. "If I may," she said, "the respondent did not merely withdraw funds. He explicitly stated in writing that he emptied the account to prevent confusion. He also acknowledged using joint credit for extracurricular expenses." The judge turned back to Andrew. "Did you send these messages?" he asked. Andrew glanced at the pages, then looked up. "Yes," he said, "but they were taken out of context." The judge did not respond right away. He continued reading, his expression neutral but focused. The room felt very quiet. Finally, he spoke. "Based on the evidence presented, I am granting a temporary financial protection order," he said. "All joint assets are to be frozen pending further proceedings. The respondent is prohibited from incurring additional joint debt effective immediately." Andrew opened his mouth, then closed it again. I felt a weight lift from my chest, not because I had won, but because the chaos had been contained. The law had drawn a line where emotion could not. Outside the courtroom, Andrew approached me, his confidence gone. "This did not have to happen. You did this to me." Natalie stepped between us. "Any communication goes through counsel," she said calmly. Andrew looked at her, then at me, and walked away without another word. Over the next few days, the fallout spread in ways I could not have predicted. Marianne called again, her voice quieter this time. I read the messages, all of them. I said nothing. "I did not know," she continued. "I am sorry." I thanked her and ended the call. Lila disappeared from Andrew's social media. Her posts stopped. Her account went private. The bright certainty she had displayed only days earlier faded without explanation. Then, Natalie forwarded me an email she had received indirectly, something Andrew had not mentioned. His company had placed him on administrative leave pending an internal review. Thomas Reed from Human Resources had flagged irregularities tied to his recent conduct, travel expenses that no longer aligned with policy. It wasn't the affair that triggered it. It was the pattern, the documentation, the attention he had drawn to himself. I did not feel satisfaction when I read that, only inevitability. That evening, I sat alone in my living room, the lights low, the house quiet in a way that no longer felt threatening. Andrew's last message sat unread on my phone. I did not need to see it to know the tone. He had lost access to money, yes, but more than that, he had lost the version of himself he relied on, the one who assumed control, who believed confidence could replace accountability. As I turned off the lamp and let the room fall into darkness, I understood that the most painful losses are not always financial. Some people cannot survive the moment their reflection stops agreeing with them. And for the first time since this began, I felt certain that whatever came next would unfold on ground that was finally steady. Chapter 5. I didn't win him. I outgrew him. In the weeks after the hearing, life did not explode the way I used to imagine a marriage ending. It contracted. It got quieter. It rearranged itself around new boundaries, the way a room looks after someone moves out and you realize how much space they took up without ever noticing. The temporary order did what Natalie promised it would. It stopped the bleeding. The accounts stayed still, not solved, not finished, but contained. There was a strange comfort in that. Not happiness exactly, more like the relief of finally hearing a door click shut after months of feeling it drift open behind you. Andrew tried to claw his way back into control at first. His messages changed from anger to pleading. He asked for a call. He asked for coffee. He asked to talk without lawyers, as if the thing that had shattered us could be patched with a reasonable conversation. I did not answer. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I had learned that if I opened the door even a crack, he would walk through it and rearrange the story until I no longer recognized myself in it. Marianne called twice in the first week after court. The first time, she sounded like she had not slept. "I am not calling to fight," she said. "I just need to understand." "You already did," I replied. "You read the messages." There was a pause, the kind that carries a heavy decision. "I did," she said quietly. "I did not raise him to do this." I almost laughed at that, not out of cruelty, but out of disbelief at how many women say those words as if it changes what their sons choose to become. "I am not asking you to fix him," I said. "I am asking you not to make this my fault." She exhaled slowly. "I will not." That was the closest thing to an apology she knew how to give, and I accepted it without trying to squeeze more out of her. I had spent too long expecting people to say the perfect thing after doing the wrong thing. Real life does not work that way. Malin came by the shop one afternoon with 2 coffees and a look that said she had been worried about me. We sat in the back office, surrounded by invoices and shipping boxes, and she studied my face like she was checking for cracks. "You are holding up?" she asked. I took a sip of coffee, considered the question. "I am upright," I said. "That counts." She smiled gently. "It does." The shop became my anchor, not as a distraction, but as proof. I opened on time. I helped customers choose dresses for interviews, for weddings, for funerals. I listened to women talk about their lives while they stood in front of my mirror and tried to decide who they wanted to be. I realized I had been doing the same thing for myself. Andrew's world, on the other hand, started shrinking. The administrative leave became an investigation. The investigation became an official meeting with human resources. I heard it through a mutual acquaintance first, then through a short message from Andrew that he probably meant as a threat, but read more like desperation. "They are looking into everything," he wrote. "This is going too far." I did not respond. I didn't have to. His own choices had created a paper trail, and paper does not care about feelings. A few days later, Natalie called me. "He has counsel now," she said. "He is trying to negotiate terms." I asked what that meant. "It means he is realizing his confidence is not a strategy," she replied. "It means reality has arrived." I thanked her and hung up, then stood in the doorway of my office looking out at the sales floor. A woman was laughing softly with my part-time employee while holding up a blouse. The sound was small and ordinary, and it hit me how much of my marriage had been spent trying to protect Andrew from ordinary consequences. Lila vanished almost completely. At first, she went private. Then her account disappeared. One day, Andrew posted a photo that suggested he was alone. A week after that, his profile went silent too. I did not stalk him, not in the obsessive sense, but I noticed the absence because absence was what he had given me first. A month after court, I got a voicemail from an unfamiliar number. It was Lila. Her voice sounded thinner than I expected, like she had been practicing calm and failing. "Claire," she said, "I know I should not call you. I just want you to know I did not know he took the money. He told you both agreed." I listened to the message twice, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I wanted to understand what kind of story she had been sold. I did not call her back. There was nothing to say that would change what happened, and I was not interested in teaching her a lesson. Life was already doing that. The divorce process moved forward in its slow, grinding way. Paperwork, disclosures, more meetings with Natalie, more quiet decisions that felt strangely clean compared to the mess of emotion Andrew kept trying to drag back into it. There were nights when I still felt the ache, not for Andrew as he was at the end, but for the version of him I once trusted. I mourned the way you mourned a place you loved that no longer exists. Sometimes I would stand in my kitchen and reach automatically for a second mug before remembering I didn't need it. Those moments stung, but they passed. They always passed. One evening, Marianne showed up at the shop just before closing. The bell above the door rang, and when I looked up and saw her, my body tensed out of habit. She held her purse tightly in both hands and looked around as if she didn't know where to stand. "I didn't come to argue," she said. I wanted to see you, to say it in person." I waited. She swallowed. "I should have asked more questions. I should not have believed him just because he was my son." I nodded once. "Thank you." Her eyes filled and she blinked fast to keep control. "He is living with me right now," she admitted. "He says he has lost everything." I felt a quiet, steady truth settle in my chest. "He lost control," I said. "That's not the same thing." Marianne looked at me for a long moment, then gave a small nod as if she understood more than she wanted to. She left without asking for comfort. I respected her for that. The final pieces came together slowly, not with fireworks, but with signatures. The conflict resolved the way most adult conflicts do, through documents and deadlines and the dull weight of consequence. When it was done, I didn't celebrate. I went to work the next day. I swept the floor. I folded sweaters. I kept living. People sometimes ask what it feels like to win. I don't think I won. Not in the way Andrew meant when he sent that first text, as if marriage was a game and he had found a way to take the prize and run. What happened was simpler. I refused to be erased. I refused to be panicked into surrender. I refused to let someone else rewrite my life because they were bored with the one we built. And in refusing, I outgrew him. If you are listening to this and you have ever felt that slow, creeping certainty that something in your life is shifting under your feet, I want you to hear me clearly. Quiet is not weakness. Preparation is not cruelty. Boundaries are not punishment. They are protection. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to know what you would have done in my place. Would you have confronted him immediately, or would you have done what I did and stayed quiet until you were ready? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, the kind that remind you that you can rebuild on steady ground, make sure you subscribe and stay with me.